Hello and welcome back to game number 6 of our new series, Masters of the Chessboard. Uh, in this series we are looking at Richard Reti's book, Masters of the Chessboard, where we're going through each of the games in that book one at a time, looking at Reti's analysis of each game and hopefully bringing in some modern theory if we can. This game is, I believe, the third game of Paul Morphy in the book. Morphy has the black pieces, and his opponent is John William Schulten, who has got the white pieces. And the year is 1857. Now, unfortunately, I haven't actually been able to find a picture for John William Schulten. I've done a quick Google search and nothing really came up. So, unfortunately, we're going to have Paul Morphy's beautiful face on the screen, but nothing for Mr. Schulten. But anyway, without further ado, let's start. So we have Schulten e4, e5, f4 going into the King's Gambit, and d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit. This was looked at in quite some depth in, I believe, the first game in the series, played by Adolf Anderssen. Schulten takes on d5, Morphy pushes e4, and knight c3. This is the first, perhaps, key deviation from the game seen by Anderssen. The game played by Anderssen, I think Reti recommended playing d3 here, hoping to exchange off this weak pawn as soon as possible. But knight c3 is a very often played move and still quite respected. Knight f6, defending this pawn. d3, hoping to trade off this pawn and also opening up a path for the bishop. And obviously, if we see e takes d3, the bishop will come into play straight away. And now bishop b4, so pinning the knight to the king, therefore stopping the knight from retaking his pawn. So if the pawn captures, the knight can recapture if need be, which would also add additional pressure to this pin. And we'll actually see pins be quite a common theme in this game, actually. It's going to, I think Schulten will hate the word pin by the time this game is finished. Bishop d2 and e3. And here we have the first bit of analysis in the book by Reti. He writes how we have something that's very typical of Morphy's games, a pawn sacrifice that's not really based on exact considerations. Reti writes how Morphy was very aware of how in open positions, furthering your development is the most important concern. However, the next step after furthering your development was making the game as open as possible for the player with the lead in development. So once Morphy has gained a development advantage, he should seek to open the game and create open files for his pieces, either through pawn exchanges, breaking through the opponent's pawn structure, or even in this case, a pawn sacrifice. Here we see Morphy sacrificing his e-pawn in order to obtain his open e-file. So after he castles, his rook will come straight into the game with quite some force. So we have bishop takes e3 and castles, bringing his king to safety, but also it's quite an aggressive move because he's straight away threatening rook e8. So bishop d2, and now we have bishop takes c3. This is perhaps one of the few inaccuracies in this game. Generally, this is considered a mistake now because this bishop can perhaps be useful later on. I'm trading it now for the knight. It both gives up time and also gives up potential control over some of the dark squares in white's position. But Morphy takes, b takes c3, and now rook e8. So we see the rook coming straight into the game on the open file, and bishop e2 blocking the check, and now bishop g4. The bishop's pinned to the king, so obviously this black bishop isn't at risk. And now we have c4, and here Reti writes that white is perhaps far too concerned with his pawn structure, and But he shouldn't have really played this move. Yes, it fixes the pawn structure, but you need to develop first. You need to get your pieces into the play and get your king to safety as soon as possible, rather than trying to fix your pawn structure. Morphy responds with c6, and Reti again writes that the principle of of opening the game as much as possible is at play here. So Reti wants white to capture. Sorry, Morphy wants white to capture, so then he can recapture with this knight, and that will also open the file for the queen. And this is exactly what we happen. D takes c6, and this is the losing mistake really. Black is able to develop very quickly, and they have open lines for the queen. Perhaps giving back the material was probably the better option. And now with this recapture, Black is now threatening knight d4, attacking this bishop 3 times. And it's quite hard to see just what White can really do here. If they just play something like rook b1, we'll see knight d4 come into play, and there's no real way that White can respond to this. The computer's move is bishop c3, but even then, after knight takes e2, knight takes e2, rook takes e2 check, then the queen almost has to take, in which case the game's lost for White already. So that's what this move is threatening, knight d4. So White plays king f1, which is probably the most practical move available, trying to step out of the way of this pin. Sorry, not this pin, step out of the way of this pin. Although there is obviously still a pin here. But this bishop is under attack now. There are 2 attackers and 1 defender. But now we see Morphy play rook takes e2. And Schulten replies knight takes e2. And now we see perhaps why the rook took on e2, because this pin is still active. This knight cannot move. Whereas if he took with the bishop, there is no pin anymore. The knight is free to move, and White can potentially free up their position quite nicely. But instead, he took with the rook, which is the correct move, so now this pin remains. Now we have knight d4, piling up the pressure on this pin. And now queen b1, and there's no analysis in Reti's book as to why queen b1 was played, and it's hard to really see quite why. I can only assume that he's just trying to get out of the pin and just trying to give back some material. But this is the game was lost earlier on. The game was lost when White took on c6, but this queen b1 move just furthers the loss. It's now completely hopeless for White. And Morphy just shows why. Bishop takes e2 check. Now king f2, and immediately it's mate in 8. And Morphy sees this. We have knight g4 check, king g1. If the king goes to e1, then we'll have queen h4 check. And after g3, queen e7. And now the threat is bishop f3 check. And if just something like rook f1, then we'll see bishop f3 come into play. And after just trying to block the check, it's checkmate. The queen's covering all these 3 squares, and the bishop's covering the final escape square. So instead, so that's what happened after king e1. In the game, we saw king g1, which unfortunately isn't much better. Morphy plays knight f3 check, g takes f3, and queen d4 check. And we see again, even with this knight, he's just opening files for his heavy pieces. And his queen can now come into play with queen d4 check. King g2, the only move. Queen f2 check, king h3, queen h3 check, defending the knight and checking the king, forcing it further up the board to h4. Knight h6, bit of a quiet move, but it's now mate in 2. Queen g1, trying to defend this square, but after knight f5 check, king g5, and queen h5, we have a nice little checkmate here. The queen x-rays the knight, the pawns cover all of these squares, and the queen is defended by the bishop. And there we have it, a fairly quick game. Yeah, we saw this position on move 16, it's already mate in 8, and a mate which Morphy saw. And on move 15, the computer analysis immediately gives -9 for black, or -8, it's varying a bit, but just on move 15 it's already lost for white. But the main issue was white taking on here. At this point it's quite an equal game, but white perhaps got a bit greedy and perhaps didn't want to give back any material, which is a mistake we've seen time and time again. But in doing so, black can recapture with his knight, and now black has 4 pieces in the game, including his queen and rook, and white has just these 2 bishops really, and this one is completely pinned to the king, and this one isn't really doing much. It's just staring at this pawn, and it's not doing much on this diagonal either. So you can definitely, it's quite an instructive game in terms of sacrificing pawns and material in order to get a lot of open files for your pieces. And I think it's probably why Reti included it in his book, focusing on not only development but piece activity, even at the cost of material. So that's game number 6 in the book, Reti's Masters of the Chessboard. We've still got a few more Morphy games, so if you enjoyed this one, I hope you tune in for the next video. And if you like the video, please like, comment and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback or any other games you want to see, please just drop a message and I will do my best to get back to it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.